So on this very sunny and sunlit day, here are my top 5 books from 2018. I wrote it in my journal, all the books I read last year, and let's see. One of my goals was to read about a book a month, and I managed to do so. I read about 15 books last year, which I've written down here. So I read books like The Power, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Flip, The Goldfinch, When Breath Becomes Air, The Girls, 7 Days in the Art World, Please Look After Mom, Minerva's Owl, The 100-Year Life, and some Korean books like 82년생 김지영, 모든 요일의 기록. I want to recommend for sure is Rich Dad Poor Dad. So this is the sequel, which is Rich Dad's Conspiracy of the Rich. I don't necessarily recommend this one because this is like a book, as the title says, it's a book of conspiracies, and it's not necessarily that insightful at all. It's geared more towards the United States. It was very crucial in understanding like how complex the system is. It's not necessarily a must-read. I had such great expectations from the first one, which is the book that I want to recommend to everyone, because although the principles are pretty simple, I feel like that really changed my perspective on everything. So it also helped me shape a lot of my decisions from last year. And so, oh man, I don't know where it is. Oh, that's right, I lent it to my friend, so that's why I don't have it here. But the book was really interesting because it really does a great job in differentiating between a rich dad and a poor dad, which is based on the true story of the author who had his quote-unquote poor dad that worked in the regular government job, paid his taxes, and worked for the wage month to month. And there was this rich dad who was an entrepreneur and a very strategic and pointed way of thinking about things. Well, he has this diagram in his book that was really impactful to me, and how easily we start consuming things that do not return to us as assets, but actually just is expended and is like momentary. So like the rich way of thinking is to continuously build your assets and invest into things that actually return money to you. So this could be in the form of courses or in the form of like actual investments, but we tend to buy things that by giving it emotional or moral value. I found myself making clearer and more rational judgments based on this book. For example, I really wanted a pet because I've always grown up around animals, and staying in Korea, this is the longest time I've never had a pet. So I just was ready. I was almost looking at pet like shelters every week, and I was just not ready. I was not financially ready to be able to support a pet. The amount that I spend in caring for my pet in terms of food or grooming or just the hours I would be taking out of work to be running with my dog or just taking care of him, I was not ready to do that. At the time I was really hustling and trying to pick up as many jobs as possible so that I could fund myself and reach my financial goals. This was a really big change in my life because usually I am just more emotionally driven. I mentally believe that they are family members, so it's not necessarily, you can't really judge the financial weight of these animals, but also I think it gave me a rational point of view and a sound judgment when before I actually just jump ahead. It's pretty sad, but that's how it is, and I highly recommend everyone to read Rich Dad Poor Dad. This book also encouraged me to study finance in university in my last semester, and that was probably a risky choice considering that I'm pretty unfamiliar with the course, and I was taking it with some people that were pretty knowledgeable about this. They were like getting interviews on like JP Morgan and stuff, but honestly I am so glad that I took it because at least although I am not an expert in anything, at least I know for for sure that there are systems and ways to go around the system. So I think it'll encourage me to question things before taking everything at face value. The second book I want to recommend is Outliers, and this is a cult favorite in Korea, and I'm sure a lot of people have read this. This is by Malcolm Gladwell. It talks about successes and the child prodigies, the heroes, the once in a lifetime kind of entrepreneurs, people, leaders that we think straight off the bat. There is like Elon Musk, Steve Jobs, any of the tech giants. But this book talks about how there are some certain limitations, not limitations, but there are certain fundamentally life-changing situations that enable these people to really go after their dreams. And of course there needs to be a great amount of effort, a great amount of passion and drive, but also they were placed in circumstances that allowed them to advance in life and make and do incredible things. It talks about how, for example, if you were born in the Great Depression, no matter how intelligent you are or how incredibly dedicated you are to your craft, there was literally no way you could succeed as much as you could in this current day and age. And another really interesting fact was the differentiation between a well-off family and a poor family, and how they fundamentally shape the way the children live the rest of their lives. So for example, a thing that struck out to me was that rich parents or rich mothers are very adamant in their child's upbringing and their child's education. So for example, if the kid is not performing well in school, the mom will go to the school, ask for extracurriculars, really try to get into the nitty-gritty of why the kid isn't performing as well. And on the other hand, the poor family generally leaves the kid to fend for himself or herself in the school, and this comes from a lot of circumstantial situations. For example, the mother might not be able to afford to take a day off and go to talk to the teacher, or the school itself might be in a neighborhood that's not very academically driven. And because of that, these two children, born the same year, same time, they might have completely radically different lives. And this is because of the way they are taught to react and interact with authority, question the authority and try to create a better life for themselves, while the poor child grows up to be afraid of authority. They blame the system for a lot of the mishappenings, and because of that, they grew up with radically different points of views, and it really influences the way of life. And I thought that was really interesting, so I really highly recommend this book, especially if you are in a highly competitive society, as I am in South Korea. I look back and forth, and so I like to have all my books stored in here. The third book I want to recommend is The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Beep. And this book, I remember that book, I was reading it when I was pretty low and desperate in finding the self-confidence. So I was at a low point where I wasn't prioritizing myself and my own desires in my decision making. And this was when I wanted to make a career move. I felt like I owed the previous internship something. I was approaching the end of my contract, and it was my choice as to whether I wanted to renew it or not. But how my team or my employer felt more so than my own happiness and my own passion. And I think I knew that there was something wrong in the way I was thinking, but I didn't know how to go about it. So I remember reading this book fervently before I decided to hand in my resignation, and that book was amazing. The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Beep. And I thought it was interesting because that book, it wasn't necessarily stop caring about other things, but it really helped me shape the idea of morals, of my values, and really prioritizing what's important to me in the long term and something that brings me joy. So I highly recommend that book for anyone that's kind of trying to up their self-confidence, up their decision-making process, upgrade their life, and think of things in a new light. There is so much light going on. I wonder if I'm even showing on camera. The fourth book I want to recommend is a book called The 100-Year Life. And this book I've been recommending to any of my friends that have parents that are struggling to understand that we are living in a different generation. I first got to know this book when I was on the subway. I was just riding on the subway, and then suddenly I saw this old man just kind of like randomly talking to the lady next to him, and I was just kind of alert, like seeing what's going on and seeing if I could jump in any way. But then I realized that he was handing her this book, and he was literally just giving her this book, and he was an elderly man, but he was just raving about this book and saying how incredible it was and how he highly recommended it to every youth out there. Also, I started recommending this book to all of my friends, to my two T's moms, because I think it's so important and it captures really well how different we are now and how the systems that we have in place can no longer really support how we are today. So for example, there are still parents that want stability for their children in the form of jobs that can support them for 40 years. And while this makes sense, I just believe that it's not the life that is achievable, and it's not the life that should be led, personally speaking. And the reason for that is because I feel like if you are stuck in a job for longer than 5 or like 10 years, you're not growing. You are very comfortable in your space and you are learning that company's system. So for example, if you're working in Samsung, then you are learning how to use that operating system. You are learning how to use that structure that has been put in place. But once the company goes down, or once the economy goes down, or once anything goes down, you are not ready to do anything. And I think this book ties quite closely to the book called Gig Economy. So I thought that was an excellent book that I highly recommend to everyone, especially for your parents. Like I was recommending it to my friends as like their parents' Christmas presents, just pop it in there and make them read it, because it's great, honestly. Okay, so the final book that I want to talk about is The Goldfinch. And I thought that book was amazing because it was one of the few books that I read for the storyline versus like self-improvement, which I think was the major goal for last year. Remember, I really love this quote, so I highlighted it. It says, "What if our badness and mistakes are the very things that set our fate and bring us round to good? What if, for some of us, we can't get there by any other way?" So I really love the last chapter of this book. It goes really in depth about life and philosophy and how sometimes the mistakes that we made, the regrets that we have, are just key stepping stones to where we are. And it's necessary because while no one wants to face the pain, it's really what makes us change, it makes us grow, and it gives us the lessons we really need in this lifetime. I'll read the quote to you. "Because between reality on the one hand and the point where the mind strikes reality, there's a middle zone, a rainbow edge where beauty comes into being, where two very different surfaces mingle and blur to provide what life does not. And this is the space where all art exists and all magic. And I would argue as well, all love. Or perhaps more accurately, this middle zone illustrates the fundamental discrepancy of love. Viewed close, a freckled hand against a black coat, an origami frog tipped on its side. Step away and the illusion snaps in again, life more than life, never dying." She goes on to say, like the prism of color, the sun strikes raindrops at a certain angle. So the space where I exist and want to keep existing, and to be quite frank, I hope I die in, is exactly the middle distance, where despair struck pure otherness and created something sublime. I just remember that all that I had after reading this book. This book was at such a beautiful end, and I really recommend anyone that's looking for a good read to go for it and just be blown away by the end. Planning on reading in the nearby future. I've been looking more towards marketing books, and so I have a good mix of like marketing classics and just other good reads. I started reading Becoming, which is the autobiography by Michelle Obama. So far, so good, so saucy. Best way I can describe it is that it's very, very juicy. The the time that she met with Obama, and he was an intern in the law firm that she was working at. She describes his like sexy baritone. But actually the book is amazing so far. It talks about such deep topics that really resonate a lot with everyone, and I was like jotting down notes because I was just so blown away, and that's the kind of book that I want to write eventually. So that's number one. The second book is The Stranger by Albert Camus, and this is another cult favorite that I just never got around to reading. But while I was looking for top 5 books to read, I read that this was one of the books that changed a lot of people's perspectives, and it's like the book of their lives, like their one. So I really want to read that. The third book I want to read is called Tribe of Mentors by Timothy Ferriss. They're all on my iPad, I already have them. The reason why we read books is to get the life advice and tips and shortcuts from people that have already lived that life and made those mistakes, learned from those lessons, and they've summarized it for you, and it's like an easy way to just level up in life. Book I want to read is the 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing, and this is another book that I started reading and kind of changed my perspective on things. It talks about how important it is to be the first person in the market, and this is what really drove me to make my life decisions and really pushed me to go for the high risk, high return lifestyle. And so I am eager to finish the rest of the book and see what tips they have. The last book I'm keen on reading is called Crashed: How a Decade of Financial Crises Changed the World by Adam Tooze. I have a long history with financial crisis. For example, we moved to Zimbabwe after the Asian financial crisis. Zimbabwe is going through a tough time financially because of the economy, and because of that I find it really important for me to understand how these things go and how to best navigate them. So yeah, these are the top 5 books from 2018 and the top 5 books that I'm keen on reading in the first half of the year. There's a YouTube ad that keeps popping up in my feed that says like, readers are leaders and leaders are readers, and so I think that, you know, reading is always a great way to level up in any form. So yeah, thank you for watching and adios.